Genesis chapter 37. Yeah. I might have to copy last week's off of your computer and put it on mine. That would save me a lot of work. Yeah, we should be slide 209, I believe is where we are at. All right. We are looking into the life of Joseph, and we've kind of made a turn out of Jacob's life. Although Jacob is still alive, we're still going to touch on Jacob and see him some more in the book of Genesis. But we're now looking at Joseph. And I want you to consider the story that was told of a wooden stick that lay quietly in the corner of a carpenter's shop. And one day, the master carpenter picked up the stick and he began to cut and carve it. Well, the stick cried out, "Why are you hurting me? Why are you causing me such pain? I'm fine the way I was." But the master only smiled and kept working. He shaved off pieces. He drilled holes straight through its center and scraped its surface smooth, and every cut seemed cruel to the stick. Every bore, every polish was a pain. Finally, the master lifted the stick to his lips. And for the first time, the stick understood. A beautiful melody filled his workshop. And the stick realized it had not been ruined, it had been remade. The master had turned its pain into a song. Joseph begins as a sincere but immature young man. He's honest and upright, and he's gifted, but he's not yet gracious. And we're going to see through betrayal and hardship that God would shape this young man and shape his integrity into influence and his pride into purpose, just as the master craftsman shaped the stick into a flute. God would carve away Joseph's youthful arrogance and refine him into a vessel through which his wisdom and grace could flow. Philippians 1:6 reminds us, "He who hath begun a good work in you will" what? "Will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ." And so what began in Joseph's teenage years as raw potential would over time become a polished usefulness through pain, through patience, and through the providence of God. And so as we follow him through this story, it's going to remind us that spiritual formation in our lives rarely happens in comfort. And God often uses difficulty or pain to polish us. He uses betrayal to build our faith, and even delay to deepen our character. And before Joseph could ever rule in Egypt, he had to learn to rest in God's sovereignty, even when everything seemed to fall apart. And so as we jump into the story of Joseph, and before we come to the betrayal, we've already seen how God was laying a foundation for Joseph's growth, shaping him through family dynamics and personal conviction and divine revelation. You remember we pick up the story in Joseph's house, and we saw his character, and we saw the family conflict. There was favoritism And there was strife in this family due to polygamy and all that it carried with it. There was resentment among the brothers, the coat of many colors. It was a mark of distinction for Joseph that no doubt rubbed hard against Reuben. I want you to understand and think about this, because culture is different where we are in Western civilization. The mindset of Reuben and family and cultural dynamics in the East is one of shame and honor. And so as Joseph is receiving this honor, and Jacob has never truly dealt with Reuben's sin that we looked at, this is a serious action against Reuben. And so we see this favoritism, and it is stirring the division. And we remember that favoritism not only breeds contempt, it burdens the one who is favored. It fractures relationships. And we're seeing this going on in Joseph's family. There is a confederacy that is just brewing under the surface. It simply needs the right circumstances for it to form. We see Joseph's character as well, and his youthfulness, he wants to do right, but he's in his immaturity, he doesn't communicate well. He shares his dreams. And of course, that does not sit well. His brothers are upset about it. Even Jacob is looking at it and kind of going, man, this is hard to process. But we know that Jacob is considering it because Jacob's been through a similar experience. But all the while, this is brewing under the surface, this conflict that is coming. And as we move into verse 12 through 17, we find the task and Joseph's obedience. And Jacob comes to Joseph, and verse 13, and he says, "Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them." And he said unto him, "Here am I. I'll go do it, Dad." He was obedient. He was a good young man. Little bit of question on the discernment of Jacob, though, right? Seeing all this stuff that is brewing, and here he sends Joseph off on his own. And Joseph goes to look for them, and we know that this man finds him in the field. He's wandering the field looking for his brother. And again, there's an intervention, and we see the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. God is directing Joseph's steps. He's sending him to the place that he needs to be. That's difficult sometimes, right? Have you ever just wanted to see the future? Oh, if I could just see the future, everything would be better. Let me ask you a question. We have the distinct privilege tonight of looking at Joseph's life and seeing his future, our past, right? Do you think Joseph really wanted to see his future? Would you have wanted to see the future being Joseph? It'd been awful hard to obey, right? Because God was working a work. God is setting the stage to make and break this young man into a trophy of his grace and his glory. And up to this point in Joseph's life, he's displayed promise, but he doesn't yet have the perspective that he needs. He has faith, but he doesn't have the depth of that faith and relationship with God. He has the vision and the dreams, but he doesn't yet have discernment. And so as we come into verses 18 through 28, we're watching God set the stage for a refinement process in Joseph's life. And it's going to happen through betrayal. Joseph is going to learn humility. Through injustice, he's going to learn to trust God's providence. And through suffering, he is going to be prepared to save the very ones who wronged him. I want us to understand this as we look at Joseph's life. God's grace does not shield us from trials. It shapes us through them. And Joseph's life stands as a living testimony. When we look at Philippians 1:6, we ought to think of Joseph. Especially when we find ourselves going to a verse like that, looking for encouragement, looking for support, looking for grace and help in a time of need. He who hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. God is working a work. And so let's continue as we look at this betrayal. We know that Joseph has been directed to Dothan because the man told him his brothers left Shechem. They went up to Dothan. And so jump into verse 18 here with me as we look at this narrative. And when they saw him, Joseph, afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. Oh, the confederacy is set, right? The idea of conspire is to act cunningly, to deceive, and it exposes the depth of the malice that Joseph's brothers had for him. They hated him. They couldn't stand him. Given a place of favor, elevated above all, elevated above Reuben, the oldest. They hated it. And now God gives them these dreams that say that they're going to bow to him. They hated it. And so they conspire against him to slay them. And they said one to the other, behold, notice the slur, this dreamer cometh. No doubt that was their pet name for Joseph. Not a good name, but a name that they used in a derogatory fashion. Hey, dreamer, what'd you dream last night? Oh, there's the dreamer, right? And it's just coming out in venom as the brothers see him. And look at what they say. Come now. Let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Oh, do you see the depth of the hatred? Listen, beloved, when we allow our heart to foster hatred, it is a dangerous thing. Why? Because as it takes root and it turns from hatred to bitterness and it turns into a striving, what happens is the first opportunity it sees, it's going to seize that opportunity in the name of justice. Right? Here are these brothers. I mean, and as we're going to see maybe a little later here in the text, maybe they could look at Reuben and say, yeah, Reuben doesn't deserve the honor. But what about me? Well, maybe Simeon and Levi don't deserve the honor, but what about Judah, right? What about the rest of them? Oh, and the hatred is stirring. The bitterness is stirring. And now, because their justice system has been violated, their hatred goes to action. And so beware, beloved, the bitterness and hatred that can come into our heart, that can be harbored in our heart in the midst of family conflict, in the midst of relational conflict. It begins to shape our mind and our thinking. And beloved, we need to subject our heart not to our own justice system, but to God's justice system. And that is where Joseph's brothers had failed. Despite the favoritism that was going on, God was working a work. They had no clue what God was about to do. And it's important for us to understand that, beloved. There are times where we think that our justice system has been violated on the inside. You have no right to treat me that way. You shouldn't do that to me. Wait a second. Does God know? Yes. Is God at work? Yes. Be careful of a justice system that is not subjected to the heart and direction of God. And so here the confederacy is set. They say, we're going to slay him, and then what will be? He thinks that one day we will bow down to him. What's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? But go on in the narrative, because we see Reuben step in. And this is interesting, and we'll make some observations about this. Verse 21, and Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. Now again, I want us to understand this culture of honor in Eastern civilization. There was a strong, despite the fact that Reuben had done wrong, he had caused shame to his father, there is a strong sense of honor that is there for Reuben as the oldest to protect the family. And so Reuben is stepping in here and he says, let's not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. And so Reuben seeks to deliver Joseph, but there is a fear that restrains his full obedience. He should have called them out. And the truth is this, beloved, the fear of man, Proverbs 29, bringeth a snare. It was really interesting in reading Tremper Longman's take on this and the idea of the family dynamics and the honor culture in which they lived. And he says, as firstborn, Reuben bore family responsibility to protect life and to maintain order, but his past sin with Bilhah had undermined his authority. And so you can see this here. There's no doubt there is some conflict internally in Reuben's heart and in his conscience. There's conflict, no doubt, internally between the brothers, because here is Reuben trying to fulfill his role as a firstborn, and he's wanting to restore some honor. But his past sin had undermined his authority. It undermined it with his brothers. And so his desire to restore Joseph to Jacob, it can arise as much from guilt and a desire to win back favor as it can from compassion for his brother. But the problem is, Reuben is not righteous before his brothers, but he's not hardened in a way that Simeon and Levi were. I mean, they were cold-blooded killers. And so Reuben's plan, Longman says this, it says, Reuben's plan is morally ambiguous, yet it becomes the hinge on which Joseph's survival turns. His act demonstrates how God's purposes advance through morally mixed motives. What are we seeing in this action of Reuben here? What we see as a whole in Reuben's character is this. His actions revealed a man haunted by failure, motivated by guilt, moved by compassion, yet paralyzed by fear. And the truth is this: should Jacob have dealt with the sin of Reuben? Yes. But should Reuben have dealt with his sin against his father? And it's having a profound impact here in these dynamics. Now, God still uses him as a step in Joseph's journey. And the truth is, good intentions without courage rarely change outcomes. And so when it comes to doing right, when it comes to honoring God, we need to be people of boldness and courage. And here we see in this interaction with Reuben, he just can't get beyond it. I think, again, it's just conjecture because we really, Scripture doesn't give light into this. But I wonder if Reuben had not dealt with his sin the way he should have, if the story could have been different or played out in a different way, at least with his brother's respect toward him. I don't know. Could have. And so Reuben lays out a plan, but we see now the depth of cruelty in Joseph's brothers. Look at verse 23 and 24. And it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren that they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There is no water in it. And so now we see their cruelty. As Joseph comes, they lay hold of him and they strip him of his coat. They pulled it off of him forcibly. That symbol of favor. That mark of the one who would receive the birthright. And there are times where we come in our life and it seems like things that are good things are stripped away from us. They're pulled away from us. We're thrown into a pit. But here is the truth, beloved. The depth of that cruelty and envy in his brothers, the fact that they stripped him of the robe, did not remove the plan of God. Listen, when you feel like this, when you are in that place that Joseph is in your life and things are stripped away, you're thrown into the pit, it doesn't make you any less God's child. It doesn't pull you away from His divine eyes and hands. Boy, we may be tempted to feel that way, and it may be in a place where it just hurts to go through that aspect of life. But there is one thing, beloved, as a child of God, that cannot be stripped from us, and that is our identity. We are His. The favor, what eventually was going to become Joseph's, did that change because the coat was gone? No. Did it change because he was in a pit and his brothers hated him? No. Did it change that there was a divine plan in action to save the nation of Israel through Joseph. It didn't change it. And what do we need to remember? And what is Joseph learning here? God is working a work. But it gets worse. Now we see not just this cruelty, the envy, and the hatred that is stirred in the brothers, but now we see this greed that enters the picture. Look at verse 24 or verse 25. And they sat down to eat bread. And they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. And so we see Judah's suggestion to sell Joseph shows the descent from hatred now into a profit-driven cruelty. Let's not kill him. We don't want to be like Simeon and Levi. We don't want blood on our hands. Let's make a profit. We can profit from, look at that. You see the band afar off? The Ishmaelites are coming. They're buying slaves. Let's sell them. Good look at the Ishmaelites here as the idea of a worldly opportunity. Now, I want you to think about this. I know at times family and relational dynamics can be difficult. Sometimes it's hard. But can I just say this? Your family is always your family. They're always your family. And we ought to strive to have good relationships. Sometimes it doesn't happen. But we as believers, we ought to do all we can to make those relationships what they ought to be. And maybe on the other side, the choice is for a brokenness in that relationship. Maybe on the other side, the choice is to make life choices that we can't live with or abide by. But we ought to strive to make those relationships right and to keep them as right as we can. But here, we see these brothers so driven in their hatred and bitterness that they trade family for profit. Let's get rid of them. We'll make a profit. Each of us can divide the pieces of silver, 2 apiece, right? We'll make a profit off this. It's similar, or it's interesting as you consider this in the imagery. My mind goes to Zechariah chapter 11, where it says, and I said unto them, if ye think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. You say, well, that's looking forward to the prophecy of Jesus' betrayal. Yeah. Matthew 26, we know that Judas goes to the priest and says unto them, what will you give me? And I will deliver him unto you. And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. It's interesting as we see Judas bearing the weight of that guilt, actually not being able to bear it, taking his own life. We come into chapter 27 and verse 9. After he had taken his life, they didn't know what to do with the 30 pieces of silver. It says, then was fulfilled that was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value. I want you to think about this. It sounds a lot like Joseph's story, doesn't it? And we can see a sense of a parallel here. I know it doesn't refer directly to it, but it does connect in a typological way. Serves as a foreshadowing or type of Christ's betrayal by Judas. God's chosen one being rejected and betrayed by their own. Now, the line in verse 9 of Matthew 27 is not referring to Joseph's brothers, it's referring to Israel's leaders. But boy, isn't it an incredible foreshadowing and biblical example in Joseph's life of what would happen one day to Christ. God's chosen one, rejected, betrayed by his brethren, sold for silver, but ultimately used by God to bring salvation to those same betrayers. What an incredible foreshadowing. What an incredible foreshadowing of God's work of grace. I want you to understand this as we look at this aspect of these brothers. Sin often seeks justification through opportunity or advantage. Listen, beloved, our flesh is wicked. And sin, when it takes hold, boy, it can twist us, it can bind us in ways that we can't even imagine. If we let it run rampant, if we let it run free, it begins to cloud our judgment, and it often seeks justification through opportunity or advantage. And here's the scary thing. When you look at what's going on with these brothers, profit made evil appear practical. Look at this opportunity. We can make money off of this. We want to get rid of this dreamer. Let's get rid of him and make a profit. Look at the opportunity, right? What an opportunity. No. These brothers had serious issues that was going to take years for God to deal with. But he does eventually deal with it, right? We know. And so they sell Joseph to the Midianites. And look at what happens here. Look at verse 29. And Reuben returned unto the pit. And behold, Joseph was not in the pit. And he rent his clothes. And he returned unto his brethren and said, the child is not. And I, whither shall I go? Here's Reuben. He thought he had this opportunity to restore some honor and to protect the family. And as he is off probably tending sheep or taking care of some task, the brothers sell Joseph. He comes back and he's going, what just happened? And now there's a serious issue because Reuben is implicated in this now far deeper than he ever thought he would be. Isn't that the deceitfulness of sin? When we think we have control, we think that we can finagle it and work it in some way, and boy, it comes back and it bites hard. And now Reuben has a serious issue. Look at verse 31. And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of goats and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no." And he knew it, and said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. So now we see this cover up. What are we going to do? How are we going to show this to our father? And this act of deception, the Hebrew word is the idea of to cause to wander or mislead. And isn't it interesting here that we see a deception of sons mirroring the deception of the father? Butler said it this way: the deceiver becomes the deceived. God balances the scales in his time. Beloved, this is a serious thing. Can we look at it in the aspect of the seriousness of sin in our lives? The importance of dealing with sin in our lives. The importance of dealing with it in a proper way. Do we see God taking Jacob through serious difficulties and heartache? Do we see Joseph in his sin being molded and shaped as God is dealing with him? Yes, but there were so many ways that Jacob could have dealt with his sin in a better way. And if we're not careful to deal with our sin, and I'm not one who's just about generational sins and if there's a sin there that it's going to stick from generation to generation, you can't get rid of it. No. I believe that sin's pattern repeats until grace breaks the cycle. And just because there's a sin that takes place, it doesn't mean that it has to repeat itself. And whether that is us as a parent or an influencer dealing with that sin properly, or even one who has been sinned against, beloved, we need to deal with it in a proper way. Why? Because it is not about circumstances that shape us. We shouldn't let circumstances shape us or determine us. It is about allowing the grace of God to shape us or determine us. There are sins. We've observed them. It could be addictions. It could be alcoholism. It can be abuse. It can be all kinds of things. And we've looked at them and at times seen how they affect families from generation to generation. But beloved, those things can be broken and changed by the grace of God. They don't have to continue. You say, well, what could Jacob have done? I don't know, beloved. We're looking at the brokenness of a life, but we're also looking at the truth and reality that God's grace is greater. And so Joseph's blood is spilt, or not spilt, Joseph's blood is seemingly spilt. Jacob is deceived. We see that he mourns. And this is the idea of an enduring grief. He refused to be comforted. You see that there in verse 35? And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. What an awful place. What an awful family dynamic. That these brothers would deceive their father and then try to comfort him, and even in his refusal to be comforted, not tell him the truth. I mean, you see why things are just, they're not going to get any better. At least not for these brothers. I mean, we get into chapter 38, we're going to see Judah and his demise. And we're going to see God's grace in an incredible act and action in that as well. But then we see Joseph begin his journey as God is working a work. Verse 36, "And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard." And now we see this human betrayal, this family betrayal, become divine positioning. Is it awful that Joseph got sold into slavery? Absolutely. Was it awful that a 17-year-old young man had to grow up in a godless, wicked society? Absolutely. Is it a tragedy? No. God's working a work. God is getting ready, and he's getting Joseph ready to do something incredible. Longman made this observation. He said, "Every thread of tragedy weaves toward redemption." Here's the amazing thing about God. God's providence is not hindered by human sin. It is often accomplished despite it. Think of Genesis 50 and verse 20. We don't have to turn there because we know it well. Joseph said this of his brothers, "But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive." You know, our lives are touched by these things that we have seen, no doubt. Jealousy, betrayal, grief. But understand this, beloved. In Joseph's life, what men meant for evil, God was already moving toward good. And Joseph's story begins not with glory, but it begins with grace. And it's a grace that will mature through suffering. It will restore brokenness. And it reminds us that divine favor is not about favoritism, it's about faithfulness. So as we look at Joseph's life tonight, may we be reminded that even those with good character must be refined by hardship. Life is not always going to be easy. We wish it would be that way, right? But understand this, beloved, it's by God's plan and design. The fear of the Lord, Proverbs said, is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. Maybe God has you a place of humbling. Maybe God has you in a place where he's rubbing off the rough spots. Even the polishing cloth has an abrasiveness to it. Maybe God has you in that place. But understand this, God is working a work. Trust him. He wants to make a masterpiece of all of us. And may we submit, even when it's difficult. May we trust him as we become trophies of his grace and glory. Father, thank you. As we look into Joseph's life, and Lord, this is just the beginning of this process of molding him and shaping him into something that is going to be absolutely incredible. Lord, probably not a one of us in here will one day sit in a place of high recognition as Joseph did. But Lord, your work in our life, your molding us and making us, your shaping of us, doesn't make us any less a trophy of your grace and glory as Joseph. So, Father, may we look to you, a God who is always at work, whose plan is always going to happen, and you are working it in us and through us, despite the influences around us, despite difficulties that we think are unexpected in our life. Lord, you are working a work. May we trust you. And even in those difficult times, Lord, may we have the faith to know that you're working for our good. Lord, may we be encouraged in your greatness tonight, your love for us and your plan for each of our lives. Lord, thank you for the example of Joseph. May he be an encouragement to us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. I hope that you will rejoice in our God tonight. And I hope that, if you're facing something, that you'll trust him. Let him mold you and shape you through it. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying that we can walk through trials laughing and, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes there are tears. Sometimes there's hurt. But let's trust our God who's working a work, and let's rejoice in him. All right? Great. Have a wonderful week. Don't forget to put up your umbrella before you walk out, and be thankful. We could be in Indianapolis where it's going to snow tonight and tomorrow. So if you want that, then fly home with Darlene and get a little snow. But have a great week, and we'll see you on Wednesday evening.